Today I want to talk about your thread if you're sewing knits on your sewing machine. If you've been following along with me, you may have seen that I'm working on these double-faced linen knit shorts. And I'm very excited about the way they're coming out. And you can see here, I just want to show you, this is the hem treatment I decided upon. I did a little vent, okay, to let the orange peek out because it's double-faced. And then I cut the hem after I sewed it so the orange would peek through. And as I was working on these, I needed to sew them on my sewing machine versus the serger so I could get this vent sewn nice and tidy like this. So if I turn it inside out, you can see it's all finished in there and encased the way I did it. So I didn't need to do it on my serger. And this knit is very, very stable. I would say it barely stretches. It might have more of a mechanical stretch than a true stretchy knit. So I wasn't worried about the thread I was using, but I was thinking about my next pair. So let me just show you that. I'm going to put these away and I'm going to get out this next pair I've cut. This is a buttery soft French terry that's really stretchy. So I'm going to cut these out and make them smaller to compensate for the fact that they stretch more. So they're going to be a little bit, you know, more fitted, and they're going to stretch onto me, unlike the blue double-faced, well, blue-orange double-faced linen knit, which fits me loosely. So it's more of a loose pull-on short. This is going to be a more fitted short, and there's more stretch. So I'm a little worried about my seams popping if I decide to do the same vent technique and hem on here. So I was thinking about it, and I have some wonderful thread from Mettler in my stash. It's Seraflex thread. Seraflex thread is a thread that actually stretches, so it gives with your knit fabric as it stretches while you're wearing it. So what I want to do first is show you here. I think you can see I've got white. I'm just going to wrap it in my fingers and watch how it stretches. See how it's got a nice give to it? What I want to do is show you how to use this thread. I'm also going to talk about another thing you might want to use this thread for after I show you how to sew with it on knits. So I'm going to show you a few things with regular thread first. So I'm just going to stitch this, and I'm going to use a longer stitch length to prove a point I'm going to make in a minute. So I'm going to just go ahead and I'm just stitching like you would if you were doing a seam. So here's my seam, and what I want to show you is, besides the fact I got a little pucker there, watch what happens when I stretch this. So did you hear all that popping? I totally broke all of the threads. So there's absolutely no give to a seam if you just sew it on your sewing machine with regular thread. I used a little bit of a longer stitch because I wanted to point out that a long stitch lays on the surface, and then it goes down and gets the bobbin thread, then it comes back up and does another long stitch, and then it goes down and gets the bobbin thread, does another long stitch sitting on the surface. All of that surface thread has zero stretch. Where do you get it? Where do you get the stretch? You get it every time the needle goes down and catches the bobbin. I'm going to show you another seam here, and I'm going to sew it the same way with a few minor tweaks. I'm going to shorten my stitch length to, I don't know, let's 2.0. So I'm going to make it a 2.0 millimeter stitch, and I'm going to just stitch that. You can see that it takes a longer time to stitch those short stitches. Now let's see what it does. You can see it actually has more give, but I can still break the stitches. A longer stitch length had no give, and I popped the stitches easily. The shorter stitch length had more give. So I'm going to do one more experiment here. I'm going to stitch it exactly the same way, but as I stitch this time, I'm going to gently stretch it from the back and front as I sew. I'm not stopping it from going through, and I'm not pulling it out the back. I'm just gently stretching it as I sew. You just work a little bit at a time and literally just, you know, stretch it a little bit and then let your hands go with the feed dogs. Okay. All right, so let's check that out now. So now you can see I cannot pop this thread. So a short stitch length plus a little gentle stretching will create a seam with built-in stretch on knits. The downside is it gets a little ruffly because you're pulling it and then you're letting it relax. So you want to do a test and you want to steam it out and see if you're pulling it too hard. It is possible to pull it too hard and then the little ruffly, you know, the little wrinkles or ripples along your seam are not going to steam out. So if you don't have any Seraflex thread on hand and you want to give this a try, you can go ahead. All right, so now I just want to show you how to work with the Seraflex thread. I'm going to work with the white thread. I'm going to put it on my machine and I'm going to wind the bobbin first. Now, because this thread has that built-in stretch, you want to do things slowly so you're not, you know, winding it super tight and super fast. So take your time when you wind the bobbin. So the first thing is I'm just going to get my bobbin on get my bobbin into position here. All right, so I'm just going to stick it on the top of my machine like that, and then I'm going to wind. Now I don't have speed control, so let's see what happens. If you have the option to slow down your bobbin winding, do it slower. All right, so I've got my bobbin wound. I'm going to pop it into my machine. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is switch your needle out for a stretch needle. A stretch needle is designed to work with knits. It's got a ball point so it doesn't pick at the stitches, and the Seraflex thread works better with a stretch needle. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a size 14 stretch needle. I have a link to Schmet's stretch needles in the description below if you'd like to get some of those. I'm a real fan of trying to use a universal needle as much as possible because it's less expensive. But when you're working with a specialty thread, like a Seraflex thread, you want to use the recommended needle because you'll just get better results. All right, so I've got my stretch needle in. I'm going to thread my machine. It's very sad for me. I broke my needle threader, so I have to manually thread everything, but happy day, I can still see what I'm doing. All right, so I've got that threaded. Now here is the cool thing I want to show you. You saw the effort I had to put into sewing a sample that did not pop on a knit. So now I'm going to get a new piece here, and I'm just going to show you. So we're just going to pop that on there. I'm going to put my stitch length back up to 3 millimeters long. And I'm just going to let it stitch. And notice I'm not pulling it. I'm just letting it stitch. Okay. All right, so I didn't pull this at all, and I just want to show you. See how stretchy that is? So that is a 3.0 millimeter stitch, and look how stretchy it is. Like, I'm using all of my strength. I'm pulling this fabric to the absolute max, and I'm getting no popping. And also notice I've got a nice smooth, no puckers or ripples along the seam, whereas when I did it with the regular thread, you can see it's got a little bit of a ripple thing going on versus a nice flat. I really recommend, trying the Seraflex thread. Ideally, if you have like a Joann Fabrics near you or a sewing store near you, check out the colors they have there. If you're not near one of these stores, I did put an Amazon link, an Amazon affiliate link for this thread in the description below. You'll have to poke around and find the color you're looking for, but I really think it's a cool thing to use if you're sewing knits on your sewing machine. Now, another thing I want to talk about here is I have a lot of linen in my pile, and I'm going to be making some bias garments. Bias garments rely on a seam that stretches and grows with the stretch on the bias grain line. So I want to show you here, I have a piece of white linen. I'm going to draw some bias lines on it, and we're going to stitch so we can see how that works. I'm going to use the bias line on my cutting board to create the first bias line like this. And I'm going to use just a ballpoint pen here. I just want to, mark my bias grain line. I'm going to mark a few of them. Because you can see when you're on the bias, linen stretches. So I thought it'd be fun to try this thread on white. And of course, now that I'm working with white, I'm just going to rethread the top of my machine with a color so you can see it. Another place this thread would come in handy is if you're working with snug fitting pants and you want to give your seam some stretch, the center back seam some stretch, you can use the Seraflex thread to, stitch your center back seam to give it some give. All right, so let's give this a try. Oops. My tail got caught there. But I just want to show you, you can see that working with the Seraflex thread, it's going to give with the bias, the stretch in the bias direction as well. So that's another cool thing that you can use Seraflex thread for. So to review, it works great on knits. You don't have to stretch your fabric as you sew. You can also use it for high stress areas in non-stretch garments or woven stretch garments. And if you're working on the bias, it will give you a nice stretchy seam that will give with the growth of the bias as it hangs. So I think this is a really cool stretchy tool to have in your thread box. Remember, if you're working with the Seraflex thread, get yourself some stretch needles, and I highly recommend Schmetz brand stretch needles because they're a really high quality. If you need links for these things, check the description below for those. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.